All these ghosts of what the Old West was. These really big souls could come back.
We cannot act out of fear. We have to look at it as an opportunity.
We took the most common carnivore in North America. We pushed it to the brink of extinction.
To embark on a journey where we would reintroduce an animal that hasn't been here for 100 years, where do we find that balance?
Thank you so much for coming in.
It's nice to be here. I don't know many things, Elizabeth, but I know a little bit about wolf recovery. The gray wolf historically was the most widely distributed large carnivore in North America. You could find gray wolves from coast to coast, east to west, north to south. You could find them in the deserts, you could find them in the swamps, you could find them in the grasslands, you could find them in the forests. Colorado, just all of Colorado was great wolf habitat historically. There would have been several thousand gray wolves in Colorado.
How long have you lived in Colorado?
I've lived in Colorado for 21 years.
Are there wolves in Colorado?
There are wolves in Colorado, yeah.
Are there wolves in the wild in Colorado?
Maybe? I don't know.
There are. That's what they say. I haven't seen it. Yeah.
You know, we went camping and we heard some howling.
Yeah.
No, I haven't seen any. Yeah, I haven't seen any.
I'm certain there are, yes.
Yeah, you think there are?
I think there are.
There are no wolves in Colorado.
Oh, come on. There's no wild wolves?
No.
I did not know that.
It doesn't surprise me. They were all probably hunted out, huh?
The bartender said that the last wolf was killed in 1944.
The time is now upon Coloradans to decide, do they want wolves to be part of their future?
And you're involved in the restoration of wolves to Yellowstone. Can you explain some of the parallels between a wolf recovery project in Yellowstone and what might happen in Western Colorado?
We knew from the outset that if we gave them just a chance, they would take care of the rest. There's just such a rich history. I still think that this is probably, from the beginning of the project, the area that tells the richest story of restoration.
That might be, and the pen's still there.
Yeah, well, let's go.
It's great every time I come. I mean, the memories just come flooding back.
This was always an aim to get wolves to be released in Yellowstone to restore a population of the greater Yellowstone ecosystem, catching the animals in Canada. And the first batch that we got was 14 strong. The second batch we got was 17 strong. There was every satellite truck in the world there to document this historic event of the wolves coming into the park.
Literally, some people felt the world as we know it is going to come to an end if you turn these things loose. We brought the shipping crates up here, and we waited.
That's right.
And finally, we got the word from you. We've gotten approval to let them out of the crates.
Yeah.
Remember we came out?
That's right.
And we tracked them?
That's right. Strength of the pack is the wolf, and the strength of the wolf is the pack.
Yes.
It worked.
Yeah, this is history. This was a model. So this idea could be exported out to other places.
We can. I still look to places like Western Colorado. And if you can restore gray wolves, it will be the last piece of a 40-year puzzle that would result in gray wolves being reestablished from the high Arctic to the Mexican border, all up and down the Rocky Mountains. There is no other place in the world, Elizabeth, where you can imagine restoration of a large carnivore over such a sweeping, inspiring landscape. What we did in Yellowstone could be done in Western Colorado.
It is such a primal sound. We're right in the middle of elk rutting season. Rocky Mountain National Park 2015 had over 4 million visitors.
You know, they look at the landscape and it looks fine to them. There are trees, there's grass. They'll look at those willows and they'll think, even though there aren't any leaves on them, they'll think, oh, that's the way it's supposed to be. And they just don't know. There are parts of that picture that aren't right. I've been coming to Rocky Mountain National Park for almost 40 years. Over that period of time, I've seen so much of this park change. Here we are with some soils that used to be wetland soils, and they're now dry as a bone. This used to be a healthy river birch, probably 20 feet tall. My overwhelming thought is, how in the world could we allow this to happen? This was such a beautiful wetland. In the 1850s, 1860s, there was wetland all around. Water everywhere, beaver ponds, lush willow, shrublands. Probably a place to behold. At that time, we also had wolves. That was maybe the last time that this ecosystem was in balance. Because we have eliminated such a major predator, the elk populations started decimating the willows. Beaver disappeared, water table dropped, damaging the park for decades to come.
Why do you think so many people have such an emotional response to wolves, like a negative emotional response to wolves?
Ever since we have huddled around fires for comfort and security, we have shared stories. And some of the stories became so powerful as myths and a glue that bound us together. And ever since then, we have not accommodated wild, self-willed nature. And the gray wolf is all about wild, self-willed nature.
There's this long history of nature as red in tooth and claw. The wolf in the forest, Red Riding Hood, all of those things that just built cultures of fear around these animals. When you lose a carnivore that's as big and controversial as a wolf to a landscape, and the wolves have been gone from here for my whole life, the idea that it could come back, it's not just about the wolf, it's about us too, and how we're gonna handle that. We're about 15 minutes from my house in Gunnison. When you come out here, lots of times it might not look like there's much wildlife, but there's tracks everywhere. Between this tree and the rocks over there, makes a really nice little corridor for wildlife. Camera trapping involves hooking up a camera and leaving that out for a long time and seeing what comes by. All right, perfecto. The wildlife always seem to outsmart you. But when you get that shot, it's like this secret world that you get to look into. This one night, this gorgeous mountain lion just showed up on the camera. I want people to be able to understand what it's like to be an animal and what it's like to be living with wildlife. I don't think a lot of people realize how many carnivores we have. We have for a long time been living amongst predator species. They just kind of go about their business. If we have a better understanding, it could potentially alleviate a lot of fear. If I got to photograph a wolf on one of my camera traps, it would say so much about how far we've come, so much about us.
So you do hear a lot of concerns from hunters about the numbers of wolves, and how do you address those?
Well, sure, and they're valid concerns. But here's what we know. Colorado has more public land and a bigger prey population for gray wolves than anywhere in the world. There is no doubt, with an average of nearly 760,000 elk and deer in Colorado, there are plenty of elk and deer for the recreational hunter and the gray wolf.
My old bow's about as old as I am. Nothing special, but still shoot straight. Hunting for me has always been about spending time out in the country and seeing the animals and seeing the landscape as it is naturally. 20 years ago, if someone had asked me, could we accommodate a major predator like a wolf in western Colorado, I'd have probably had the same knee-jerk reaction that a lot of people have and say, no, there's no room. We'd have too many conflicts. You know, it's just so hard to sneak up within 20, 30 feet of a wild animal like an elk. And they're very, very strong, very powerful, tremendous eyesight, great hearing. We've got a big, big herd. We manage it really with hunting to kind of take the place of the major predator that isn't here anymore. People kind of wonder, are a major predator like a wolf gonna make hunting more difficult? Having the landscape work the way it's designed to work, having a natural predator-prey relationship, that's the way it's supposed to be. You know, the wolves, they go after the weak and the sick, and that's the role they play. This landscape evolved with the full complement of predators. My dad used to say there's lots of common sense in the world because nobody ever uses any of it up. Maybe doing something like reintroducing wildlife that we've lost. My family's been in Colorado for a lot of generations. We're still looking at the same landscape, some of the same water drainages, some of the same wildlife herds. We've learned some things about how this country functions.
Should it be a political issue? How can you pull together different sides to understand wolves?
I would say to Coloradans, you can go forward together. And of course, it's political to find a collective voice to go forward. If we're diligent enough, restoration can be done in a manner that's respectful of the needs and concerns of citizens.
I'm very proud to be a rancher. It's an honor, not only just because I'm responsible for the land, but it's also an American tradition that we didn't bring across the ocean like we did Easter or Christmas. This is ours. This is American. Most people think ranching is getting up on a horse every day and roping and branding, and some people even think you're running around shooting pistols off in the air. But ranching is living on the land. When it rains, you get wet. When it gets cold, you get cold.
My dad, he learned ranching from the ground up. He grew up doing it. His dad did it, his grandfather did it.
The hardest thing for humans to do is to try to understand how we need to work with nature rather than try to conquer nature. The real magic happens when you can find ways to work in harmony with nature. So some of the things that we try to do is live with coyotes rather than trying to shoot them because they're hurting us. They kill a calf or something. The wolf would be a much bigger challenge just simply because we don't really have predators of that scale. You know, there's a real downside to having a pack of wolves come onto your ranch. What's that mean to a rancher? Change. Significant change, not only operationally, but emotionally. But the possibility of losing your livelihood is a very, very big deal. However, I'm not speaking for the industry, I'm speaking for myself. I believe that wolves, although frightening, it's also very interesting. And how can we learn from this? How can we become better ranchers? Becoming better ranchers has a lot to do with living on the land. I mean, the old Chinese proverb says, the best fertilizer for the land are the owner's footsteps. You can't sit in a truck or you can't sit at home. You're gonna have to be out there. If wolves come to Colorado someday, we cannot act out of fear. We have to look at it as an opportunity. This is not just a home for cattle. One of the biggest products we produce as ranchers is conservation.
Because gray wolves so infrequently depredate on livestock, if you implement a wolf recovery program well, the problems will be footnotes into the bigger story of this restoration of an important part of Colorado's past and a part that should be part of its future too.
And what would we see in terms of benefits in Western Colorado if we did have wolves in our landscape?
There are tremendous possibilities if gray wolves became common enough and were in place long enough. And they can be great ecological engineers promoting health and diversity and resiliency. That's exactly what we find in Yellowstone National Park.
We got a couple tracks here. When we first started here, you didn't have this.
There were no wolf tracks.
The iconic status of Yellowstone 20 years ago, when we got here, was not like it is now.
When I recall, there was no beaver pond in here. How long has this been here?
The first survey I did, that was 1996, and in the entire northern range, I got one beaver colony. Now I did the survey last fall, 14, 15. This is brand new. All this willow growth has been in the last 20 years. So this site has transformed itself. Well, wolves impacted elk, so that change in elk, that came through the vegetation community. So not all these stems were browsed down. So not only have beavers increased 14-fold since wolf recovery, songbirds, all on the rise. They were not here 20 years ago. Yellowstone has gotten a breath of fresh air since wolves, the other carnivores too, have come back.
And it really boils down to a simple question to Coloradans. Do you want wolves to be part of the future?
This area can be restored. We can get beavers back. We can restore the willows. That gives me a sense of hope.
How can we change with the tide that's coming, the environmental consciousness that's growing globally? Ranchers are going to rise to that.
How do we keep the state healthy and diverse? And sometimes I think it's not about going forward. Sometimes I think it's about going back.
There's this romanticism tied with the Old West, having an animal come back like the wolf. It would take it to a whole new level. This is the real West.